Know who's been in the news a lot? The Tampa Bay Rays. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On MLB Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, welcome on in to Locked On MLB Prospects, your home for all things minor league baseball. I'm your host, Lindsay Crosby, freelance baseball writer and podcaster. Thank you for making this your first listen. Every single day, we're probably part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. And today's episode is made possible by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started today. So, Tampa Bay Rays have been in the news recently, and most of it's not been good stuff. The Shane McClanahan having Tommy John situation, losing the division lead to the Orioles, the stuff that's going on with Wander Franco. So I hopped on with Kevin Weiss of Locked On Rays for a wide-ranging conversation, touched on a lot of that stuff and some more. Enjoy.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Rays podcast, and today we have the pleasure of being joined by Lindsay Crosby, who is the host of Locked On MLB Prospects. And just putting it out there, Lindsay, for those that are watching on YouTube, you have a wonderful pullover of some sort that has a Montgomery Biscuits logo beside it.
The Montgomery Biscuits are the closest minor league team to my home. They're just about an hour away. And so because of that, I feel like I do a really good job of scouting the Southern League because they're there. I do a really good job, I feel like, of scouting this Biscuits team. And this actually, I got this in the mail this week from the team, because the end of September, the last homestand of the year, September 5th through 10th, Montgomery's facing the Chattanooga Lookouts, so affiliate of the Cincinnati Reds. I'll be on the call that week, filling in and doing the broadcast all 6 games from the 5th to the 10th. So this was a gift from them to kind of help me make sure I had a uniform for when I got there.
Understood. Now, you mentioned you focus heavily on the Southern League, and I imagine in preparations for calling some Biscuits games. Any guy or multiple guys that you're really, really chomping at the bit to see live in person and to get a closer take on, if you will?
I held my breath this week when I heard that Carson Williams was getting promoted, and he had been obviously in High A Bowling Green, and I said I either want Carson Williams or Junior Caminero, and I didn't know how it was going to work. Caminero is obviously the more lauded prospect, but Carson Williams is so unique because unlike everybody else that comes through this organization, Tampa's not played Carson Williams anywhere defensively but shortstop. I think in his entire minor league career, he has something like 2 starts at DH and everything else is at shortstop. And the fact that Tampa just doesn't do that, this team is so big on cross-training. We want guys to be able to handle second and third and short. That tells me that Carson Williams is something special, but he went straight to AAA Durham. And so I'm going to have to console myself with a top 10 overall prospect in baseball in Junior Caminero.
Yeah, that's not a bad consolation prize there. You mentioned it, Carson Williams getting the bump up from single A to AAA. Just in your history of covering and following prospects, how rare is that, and how much of a challenge is that for a player to make that jump between levels, if you will?
Yeah, so the biggest jump in the minors is commonly considered to be High A to AA, right? And obviously you're skipping this completely and going to AAA. The levels kind of exist for different things, right? When you look at why, like the way we have the minors structured, the lower levels of the minors, so A ball and High A, are more so to help you learn both mentally and physically and emotionally what it takes to be a professional baseball player, right? The grind of 6 games a week, then you road trip and 6 more games, because a lot of these players coming out of high school and college haven't done that. And then once you get that down, you advance a guy to AA, and that's a lot of personal development. You have to individually get better at these specific skills. And we know Carson Williams is a very good defender. And so they felt that he has a high enough floor as a very good defender to skip AA and go straight to AAA, where the job there is to learn how to be an MLB player. Because AAA has a lot of guys who, like, the point of AAA isn't development. AA is the highest point of development. AAA, the idea of AAA, how can we help our major league team win? So you have a lot of veterans who are trying to play their way back into MLB. You have a lot of prospects who are waiting. They are the emergency call-up. If somebody gets hurt, if somebody's unavailable, they are that. And so Carson Williams going straight to AAA tells me, one, they love his defense, and they feel like if you were to lose another shortstop at the major league level while Taylor Walls is still in the IL, you could call up Carson Williams, plug him in at short, and he would at least defensively not hurt you. So like it tells me they view his defense that highly, and then they're not afraid of the adjustment period for his bat. I think he went 1 for 3 in his first game, scored 2 runs, walked, had a double in his first game in AAA. And so they feel really good about his ability to adjust to major league hitting if they have to call him up. But I think he's that emergency option. He's at emergency depth while we have guys who are either away from the team who are out injured right now.
Right, and you would hope that nothing happens to Oslevis Basabe. And, I mean, you've already got Wander out of the fold, Taylor Walls out of the fold. It's like, how far deep into the well are we going to have to go to find an emergency replacement shortstop? And speaking of a couple things, I mean, I guess we're going to be talking middle infield or shortstop position for the next moment here or two. Who do you think has the higher ceiling or more potential to have a wonderful career? Is it Junior Caminero? Is it Carson Williams? Is it a toss-up? Too tough to say because they have varying skill sets.
I think it depends on where you end up playing the guy. Caminero, to me, he can play shortstop, right? The arm is a plus arm, and it makes up for some of the like the limited range that he might have because of just the lack of top end speed. But if you put him at third base, I legitimately think Junior Caminero could probably be a top 5 third baseman in baseball as far as power outcomes, as far as holding his own defensively. And so if they're at their natural positions, which for Caminero I think would be third base, I think his ceiling is higher than Carson Williams because I have a little bit of questions about how well Carson Williams can get his power into games. Your power tool is only as good as your hit tool. But if you had to play them both at short, I'm giving the edge to Carson Williams because it's just so easy for him. The arm is one of the best arms in the entire organization. It's very accurate. He's got like 3 throwing errors all season. Only has like 5 in total, but like 3 are throwing errors. He can throw off platform. He can throw, without his feet being set. He can range both directions. He can come in. He can go back. It's a complete package at shortstop. One of the better defensive shortstops in the minor leagues, I dare say.
How would he, and this might be a tough comparison, but maybe how he lines up with the Taylor Walls, because Taylor Walls is very renowned and revered for his defensive play.
The thing for Taylor Walls, being 27, you've still got, I want to say you've got 4 years of control left of Taylor Walls, and he's really good versatility-wise as far as moving around to second and to third. I think Carson Williams could do it, but I like the idea of between Wander and Taylor Walls, you have options to play shortstop. And then when you decide Carson Williams is ready, which at this rate could be as soon as sometime next season, you can plug him in as an everyday shortstop and Taylor Walls can move around and cover a lot of different positions for you. I think part of the value of a guy like Taylor Walls is the fact that he can give you above average defense at 3 different positions on the diamond. Whereas for Carson Williams, you could play him at third, you could play him at second, but it's kind of like using your Ferrari to deliver pizzas, right? Like it's a little bit of overkill to move a guy like that to second base. So if that makes sense, I think Taylor Walls' value is still being able to move around. Carson Williams need to just focus on shortstop, and he could be one of the better defensive shortstops in all of baseball in a couple years.
That's great. And speaking of shortstops, a guy who has gotten more action and got the call-up maybe surprisingly or unexpectedly since the latest news or update with Wander Franco, Oslevis Basabe, and he's shown some good signs at the big league level, of course, as is going to happen. There's going to be some rookie mistakes and miscues, but just overall in a scouting realm, what you think of his gameplay and what maybe he projects down the line. Is he a part-time player, an everyday player, kind of too tough to tell? I know that he's seen more as a bat-to-ball contact guy than a guy that's going to bring you a lot of power, but there's certainly some tools and some things to like with him, I would say.
Yeah, the thing for Basabe is he's going to be that guy that he from a defensive perspective, because this organization pays a lot of attention to that. From a defensive perspective, you're going to want to try to upgrade off of him, but it's going to be a lot harder than you actually think it is to upgrade off of him defensively. He's that guy, like his arm isn't incredibly strong, right? It's not flashy, but he can make all the plays you have to make at second, at third. He's got quick, good hands, really good internal clock. Having watched him some last year, it's one of those things where he understands exactly how much time he has to make the play. And that internal clock is not a thing a lot of guys have that well. And then offensively, it's obviously hit over power, like you said, and he does not miss strikes, I think. It's watching him, and it's something where he doesn't miss a lot of strikes, and then it feels like he gets the power production off of taking advantage of your mistake. And so there's always going to be a natural kind of ceiling with a guy like that. The question's going to be, can he hit enough power-wise consistently to stay in your lineup every day? But I do think he's an above-average starter who you'll probably bat him in the bottom third of the order, but you'll also realize it's very hard to replace this guy. We thought we could do it easily, and we can't. So if that makes sense, he's a major league starter. He's maybe a tier 2 and not a tier 1, but he's harder to replace than you expect, and he can play all over the diamond as well. Back to our chat with Kevin in just a second, but first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Nutrafol. Men think losing their hair is inevitable, but you can take control of your hair's future with Nutrafol's science-based hair growth supplement for men. It's the #1 dermatologist recommended hair growth supplement, clinically shown to improve your hair growth, your visible thickness, and visible scalp coverage. This supplement is a physician-formulated, natural, science-backed, ingredient-filled supplement. Patented technology provides consistent, reliable results without compromising your sexual health. And it works. In a clinical study, 84% of men showed improvement in their hair after 6 months of taking Nutrafol Men's Hair Growth Supplement. So take the first step to visibly thicker, healthier hair. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com/men and enter the promo code LOCKEDONMLB. Find out why over 4,000 healthcare professionals recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com/men, spelled Nutrafol.com/men. Enter promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's Nutrafol.com/men. Promo code LOCKEDONMLB.
Interesting. Now, there are some other guys that the Rays recently called up. One, Jonathan Aranda, who's had a cup of coffee here, there, then been sent down, and then tore it up in AAA. Really, not much more you can prove or do at that level before you finally get that opportunity again. Just do you have some sort of overall report or read on what Jonathan Aranda eventually could provide? Or like Ulysses and I have discussed, it could be a case of, maybe he's a movable candidate during the offseason because it is the Rays, so they have a lot of prospect equity on their hands, and it's just about how do we find a spot for all of these guys?
Yeah, and the thing about Jonathan Aranda is he fits that. He hasn't played as much first base as I thought he would, but he fits that first base model that the Rays have gone after recently with a guy like Kyle Manzardo, Trey Morgan in this year's draft, Nate Lowe back when he was here, about really good hit tool. Power tool is maybe necessarily fine, but it's something where he's an incredibly tough out at the plate. And the first time that he gets hot and stays hot, it feels like that's his best chance to make it to the bigs. But I do think his best role would be as that first baseman who could in an emergency could kick out and play somewhere else. And like you said, Manzardo already got moved. Given the career year that Yandy had, the fact that Xavier Isaac has come on so much this year as a different type of first baseman, that power hitting, big slugging first baseman, and you have Trey Morgan in the system, Jonathan Aranda feels like a very attractive trade piece if you want to go out and get another arm in the offseason, simply because the infield is so loaded. He can't really give you a ton of defensive value anywhere else. And if you're not going to be able to give a lot of defensive value, it feels like this team wants you to be a very good power hitter, and that's just not necessarily his game. His bat speed's fine. His power's average at best. He beats you with his approach, with his pitch recognition. It doesn't feel like he moves the ceiling enough to make a difference versus the other options you have in the system, right? And then Jonathan Aranda is a perfectly fine player. I'm not saying anything's wrong with him, but what he does, the hit over power, okay defense, you can get that from a lot of other places. Right. Some of the guys behind him that have that same profile, a Manzardo, a Trey Morgan, the reason why they became such top prospects is because they were better at the hitting part and the defense part than Jonathan Aranda. Jonathan Aranda is kind of like a diet Kyle Manzardo.
That makes sense. Well, you mentioned Kyle Manzardo a couple times, so I want to get your take on what you thought of that trade that the Rays made with the Guardians, a 1-for-1, which doesn't happen all that often. I guess more or less a true baseball trade, need for need, if you will. And there's so much talk and hype surrounding Kyle Manzardo. We actually had him on the podcast in the off season, and
that was a good episode.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully he finds a spot and thrives there. But just the idea of the Rays giving up a rising prospect like Manzardo for Savali, who has an injury history, but has a proven major league track record and has a couple years of control on his side. And by golly, the Rays certainly need pitching between the news of Shane McClanahan coming down and so many others. And
Jeffrey Springs, Rasmussen.
And question marks on if the Rays are going to, keep Tyler Glasnow around, considering he's owed $25 million next season.
It felt like a very smart move to make for the reasons you mentioned as far as the contractual control and the fact that Savali's having a good season and has a lot of the traits that the team likes. And you hate to lose a guy of the caliber of Kyle Manzardo, and a lot of people are going to kind of look at the stats and say, oh, well, he wasn't having a good year this year. I'm not sure if you guys have talked about this. There's a lot of other things that have gone into what's happening for Kyle Manzardo this year, a lot of family health issues and things like that.
Right.
But it was a really smart trade because it was a position of strength, taking from that to fill a position of need and then having additional control. So many of the other pitchers that were traded at the deadline were guys who were rentals or had one more year left. I'm thinking about Scherzer and Verlander. And the cost was incredibly high for just about every player. And so the cost as far as prospect capital you gave up, yes, you gave up a top 100 prospect, but the value to the Rays was better than a lot of other teams because that was a top 100 prospect at a position you have a lot of really talented players. So it wasn't the same cost, the equivalent cost to the Rays as it would have been to somebody else to make that deal. I liked it when it came in. I still like it now. I know that Savali hasn't gone into the sixth inning on either of his starts since he got here, but as of time of recording, I think he throws maybe the next day. But I like what he does. I think it was a really smart trade simply because of the value of multiple years of control for a player that you had other players who could step into his spot.
And another guy who recently got called up, of course, not Kyle Manzardo, but previously with the talk of Basabe and Aranda, Curtis Mead, a guy who's been talked about endlessly and has been one of those guys that has fronted some of the prospect lists, certainly within the Rays organization. He also has the unique tie-in of being Australian. We've had him on the show. He's a great guy, great to talk to, and seems to be really with it. He's had his share of growing pains in the couple of weeks that he's been up. Just what is your outlook on him going forward? Of course, we can't make a determination on 2025 at bats, but just what you in your heart of hearts believe he can eventually become as a major leaguer.
Yeah, he struggled a bit this year because of the wrist injury. And I think when you look at him at the major league level and you see what he's done this year, I think some of the lack of power production can be traced back to lingering effects from that wrist injury. I remember being in Montgomery for his last Double-A start, and at the time, we didn't know it was his last Double-A start. Yeah. But the thing that impressed me with Curtis Mead is I think defensively, he's a lot better than we've given him credit for. And that's something where the story on Curtis Mead was the defense isn't necessarily that great. He's just a pure hitter. He's like Luis Ariz as far as like not being able to play defense, but he can hit really well. I think his defense is better than we gave him credit for. And we see guys get better defensively as they rise through the minors. That's a natural progression. Mm-hmm. But when he's tinkering, you run the risk of finding something that works and not letting it settle before he tinkers with it again. That's the thing about Curtis Mead you have to be careful of, is he likes to just adjust little small things. Maybe it's the positioning of the hands, or maybe he drops his elbow, or maybe he changes his feet to slightly open stance for a day or an at-bat or a week or whatever it might be. When he tinkers and finds the right thing, as long as Tampa Bay's coaches can go to him and say, hey, keep doing that. That worked. Keep doing that. You're going to have somebody who's going to be a 65, 70 grade hitter at the major league level. And we'll have, if everything connects, we'll have more so line drive power than massive home run numbers, but could probably put 25 out in a season and can give you versatility to cover third base, but still be primarily a second baseman. So I like the outlook. It's just one, getting the wrist injury taken care of, and then two, getting him back into the swing of major league pitching and what it takes to be successful at that level.
Yeah, and that's something that takes time and probably takes playing just about every day, getting your plate full of 3, 4, 5 at bats, whatever it may be, as well. Mm-hmm. And hopefully he figures it out and thrives at the big league level. You mentioned tinkering. How I guess frequent is that among prospects nowadays, of them trying to rework things and mess around with things during the course of the season, and I guess going into the major leagues as well? I know that's been kind of a theme with major leaguer Brandon Lau, where he's always trying to figure out the next thing, or he'll go through a slump and play with a lot of things, and it's just kind of a constant battle of finding your way again. Almost like as a golfer, you think you have it all figured out, something's messed up, and then you got to go back to the drawing board and, okay, well, I wasn't shifting my weight correctly, or I'm not rotating correctly, or the hand position is off, whatever it may be. It just, how common is that across baseball, you would say?
It feels like a lot of prospects, like the ones that I've talked to and the hitting coaches that I've sat there and watched batting practice with, it feels like everybody is either, I don't change anything until you make me, or I'm desperate to fix it, or I'm constantly changing things to see either what's comfortable or if I can get better. Mm-hmm. And that's the two schools of thought. A lot of, as we've gotten better with biomechanical analysis, and a lot of these players are getting more formalized hitting instruction from a younger age, a lot of guys are embracing that tinkering mindset of, maybe if I do this, it'll help me engage my hips earlier so I can get to that inside fastball and pull it down the line. Right. So it's becoming more and more prevalent, but it's still not incredibly common.
Understood. Okay.
Going to wrap up our conversation with Kevin in just a second, but first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Sleeper. Do you think Yandy Diaz can hit a home run tonight? We sure do, and on Sleeper, you can swing for the fences with up to a 100 times payout. All you have to do is choose 2 or more players that you like, select more or less on the stat categories like home runs, strikeouts, hits, and more. You get your picks right, and you could win big. And dynamic payouts are now live. In short, each player projection has a multiplier attached to it, as opposed to just a preset multiplier based on the number of picks you are making in a contest. So with dynamic payouts, you can get higher payouts than other apps with less picks. Use promo code LOCKEDON. You'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Now, terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. They're operational in over 30 states, so check out Sleeper today.
One more guy that I want to focus on at the major league level who recently got the call up and moving from a position player focus to a pitching focus, Jacob Lopez. He in his most recent outing against the San Francisco Giants went 3 innings and looked impressive as a lefty. And I know that his minor league numbers, just the strikeout rate and just overall seem to merit good things and good vibes. Just do you sort of have a read on what he is and what he could become and sort of his placement onto this Rays roster?
Yeah, Jacob Lopez changed a lot of stuff going into this year. And the thing that I have to worry about, I was really excited to see what he does at the major league level because he started the year in AA Montgomery, and the Southern League in the first half of the year had those tacky baseballs, the pre-tacked baseballs that MLB was testing. And so because of that, so many pitchers outperformed their career numbers in AA because they had an advantage. And so we saw when he got to Durham, there was a couple things to be a little bit nervous about. The walk rate just about doubled from 2.9 per 9 to 5.1 per 9. The strikeout rate came down to, I think, from 14.5 to a more normal 10.4, but the ERA didn't really change. And so the stuff maybe wasn't as sharp in AAA with an MLB ball versus that tacky baseball, but the essence of who he is as a pitcher was the same. And so I think he's had, he's come in, I think, 1 game in relief, pitched 3 innings, gave up, I want to say, maybe 1 run or so. But I think that he's a good pitcher, and he's better than they expected. I mean, he was a 26th rounder in 2018. Those guys are organizational guys, right? He was drafted by the Giants. He wasn't drafted by the Rays. Those are organizational guys. And the fact that he even made it to the bigs is a player development success for Tampa already, never mind the fact that he is in the bigs and is having some success.
That's great. And again, the Rays need pitching. They need all hands on deck, all help on deck, particularly on the bullpen end of things as well. Getting back to more of the prospecting, we've mentioned guys like Junior Caminero, Carson Williams, Curtis Mead, who's gotten the call-up, Jonathan Aranda, who's gotten the call-up. A guy who has very mixed opinions on what he is and what he may or may not become is Vidal Brujan. He's gotten multiple opportunities and just hasn't really done much with them, I would say maybe offensively or defensively. In fact, part of the reasoning for the Rays calling up Basabe instead of Vidal Brujan is because they've already optioned him up and down 4 times. Brujan, that is. So, so obviously it's just trying to figure out what is he and what he could become. But just, do you have any take on Vidal Brujan? Is he more of that 4A player or that last man on the bench who can give you a little speed and versatility and not much more beyond that?
It's beginning to look like that, right? There's a disconnect between what he did in the minors and what he's done in the majors. His career batting average in Tampa, I want to say it's like just under 100 games. It's just under batting 200. He's batting his weight, but that's because his weight's pretty low. And so figuring out that disconnect is something that if Tampa hasn't been able to figure that out, I'm not sure a lot of other teams are going to be able to. We knew the power wasn't necessarily there, but the contact ability hasn't been there like we thought it would. And then defensively, I feel like he's been moved around enough. I mean, he's played everything from short and second and third to he had some time in center field in 2021 that it feels like he's in that scenario where he hasn't gotten comfortable. And because he can't get comfortable, things aren't clicking at the plate. Things aren't necessarily clicking in the outfield or wherever he may be. And as of now, it's looking like either a quad A player or a change of scenery type. You find a team that is looking to get rid of a prospect that you find, or a former prospect that you have a trait that you like, and Vidal Brujan is the swap for that prospect. Feels like that's probably in everybody's best interest at this point. But in the meantime, feel free to use him in the postseason as like a designated runner. Bring him in. If it's the 9th inning, put him in at first base if you're down by a run and you have to steal some bags and hopefully score on a base hit. He's the guy for you. But other than that, I don't necessarily see much that Vidal Brujan can bring to this team because offensively, you've got guys who are better than him, and defensively, unfortunately, he hasn't lived up to the promise we thought he had.
Yeah, and also, unfortunately, you talk about Vidal Brujan a couple years ago. He was almost, in the eyes of some, untradeable, and his value was so high as a prospect. And now the value certainly dropped off. So what can you get for him in return is a big question mark as well. But it could be a case of you got to go the change of scenery route. So
every prospect should have a price. Now, that price may be astronomical. If you try to trade for Jackson Holliday, you're going to have to give up everything and part ownership of your team. But every prospect should have a price. Including
Wander Franco a couple years ago?
It would have had to. That would have been one of the highest possible prices. Yes. But, I mean, you saw Kyle Manzardo. He wasn't untouchable, but he was top half of the top 50. And he got you a pitcher with an MLB pitcher with multiple years of control. Like, that's the kind of price that, think about 2 years ago, what you could have gotten for Vidal Brujan if you had moved him. It could have been an arm in this rotation who's still there right now.
Yeah. And I know that, Aaron Savali maybe isn't the name brand that, some Rays fans would have wanted for the Kyle Manzardo, because we get into, not to get too much into your line of work, but the prospect hugging and valuing and wanting to hoard our prospects. It's like Aaron Savali, he's got a track record. He's a good pitcher. Maybe just because he's on the Guardians versus another team, he doesn't quite have that cachet. But I'll digress from all that. So the Rays as a whole, their farm system, as of this recording, as of today, where would you put them in the pantheon with the rest of baseball 1 to 30? Are they 5th? Are they 8th? Are they 12th? Just where would you kind of ballpark them at this point? And it might be a little bit challenging because, I don't know if you want to consider Curtis Mead still a prospect, Jonathan Aranda still a prospect, just, all encompassing with that.
That's the hard part is the timing, because in 2 or 3 weeks, you may not have Basabe, you may not have some of these guys still in there. But no, for the Rays, I have this as I'm going to say, kind of getting back into it, probably a top 6 or 7 unit still. Now, the strength is definitely in position players versus pitching. There's a lot of talented pitchers in there, a lot of guys with tools, but not necessarily, guys who are poised to debut and be number 1s and number 2s. And some of that's weighted by Shane Boss is technically still a prospect too. But I still would call this a easily top 3rd system, if not, top 6 or so, simply because of the depth and especially the quality at the top. I mean, I've got Carson Williams, Caminero, and Mead all as top 35 prospects, and Caminero to me is a top 5 prospect in baseball. And so because of that, I think you have to consider this as a really good organization.
Just for fun's sake, who's number 1 on your list in terms of organization wide or baseball wide? Who's the number 1 team?
It's the Orioles, and they're actually in a similar position where they have a lot of position players who are really high in the system as far as sitting there in AAA with Heston Kjerstad and Colton Cowser. They have that younger shortstop. In this case, the Caminero comp is Jackson Holliday. They have that younger shortstop, and then they have a bunch of high-level position players, but not as many arms as some of the systems below them. So I think it's a really good comparison for Baltimore and Tampa Bay back and forth there.
Okay. Lindsay, you may be the future play-by-play broadcaster long-term for the Montgomery Biscuits. Who knows where it snowballs from there? Maybe the Durham Bulls, maybe the Tampa Bay Rays. Who knows? But in the meantime, Lindsay, how can people find your work, podcast, plug it all?
I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. The podcast is at Locked On Farm on Twitter. Obviously, Locked On MLB Prospects, available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And then everything else, the baseball writing, the college baseball writing, I always link that through Twitter as well.
Okay, awesome. And then final question here. By 2030, assuming that the Braves don't win every championship known to man since then, will the Rays have a ring or multiple rings on their fingers?
Once these pitchers get healthy, I can see at least one. The hard part is, and the Rays are handling this right, the hard part is luck is so much of a part of baseball, and we don't acknowledge it, and especially in the postseason. And you can go back to the movie Moneyball, and Billy Beane talks about my stuff doesn't work in the postseason because it's small sample sizes, it's luck, it's who's hot. But the front office has done a really good job of getting as many high caliber hitters as they can at developing arms, provided you have a year where, for the most part, all the rotation in the bullpen stays healthy. You have the talent to win at least one in the next 7 years.
That's all we need to hear. Lindsay, you're the best. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.